It was a beautiful place. There was the Mackenzie River that ran by the lodge that was there, and they had small log cabins with a stove and wood and a wood box by the side of it. And the four of us moved in there, and it was very colorful, but it was very rugged. It snowed while we were there, and the snow came in through the cracks between the logs and landed on our beds. But we had plenty of cover, so we were okay. And this was a great experience.
Leroy Neff first attended the feast without his family at Belknap in 1951.
At that particular time, I had a little Henry J. car, which most people have never heard of. It was a car that was made right after World War II. You could fold down the back seat so that there was a flat space there, and I laid on slept in a sleeping bag and also on an air mattress. And after a little while, the air mattress went flat.
There was a bridge that went across the river there, which was a very swift-moving river. We'd cross that bridge, and students would, and we would run up those mountains until we exhausted ourselves, and then we'd walk up till we got to the farthest up as the top of this one area, and then we'd come back and hurry and get freshened up and go eat breakfast and rush the services. And we did that numerous mornings, and I remembered that because that was so invigorating. And they had an Olympic-sized swimming pool. It was heated with hot water from the hot water springs across the river. And so that was a real blessing. We enjoyed that. And all the students took part in helping wash the dishes and set up and all that. We all worked together in that, so we all were involved.
We all enjoyed being there and the uniqueness of it, and what we were able to learn and the fellowship. It was just wonderful in that respect. And this was a wonderful setting.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really togetherness.
It was an adventure. It was something an experience we'd never had before. And to be with 60 brethren, it was just phenomenal. You know, in this big room, we were all fellowship together before services and after services, and then Mr. Armstrong would preach for 2.5 hours during services, and it was just great. We were learning all the time.
But I found that a very inspiring time, and I learned a lot that year from Mr. Armstrong, especially. There were other speakers, but he was the main speaker.
In addition to the historical sites, events of the last decade or two have also made us see more than ever the need to preserve the doctrinal truths that God handed down and that have been there throughout the ages. But when you consider doctrinal truth, there is an additional element that is very important, that is also of great value, and that is the experiences of the people who have walked in those truths. The experiences of people who have lived those truths faithfully for decades and decades.
I still remember a Bible study Mr. Armstrong had on law and grace. I don't remember the other sermons, but I remember that particular one. That impressed me very much, and I still have the notes from that particular Bible study.
We were there in this building all together, and Mr. Dwight Armstrong was just writing the hymns then. He had written, I don't think, more than 5 or 6 altogether. Mr. Armstrong always said, it's just as wrong to sing a lie as it is to tell one. And so he didn't want us singing anything that wasn't actually according to the doctrines that we knew. And we all appreciated the fact that we were singing God's psalms.
Everyone also appreciated knowing the purpose of God's feast. Mr. Armstrong explained in great detail the plan of salvation through the holy days.
The whole idea was we were there apart from the world, together, picturing the kingdom of God when we're all going to be of one mind and all together. And we really were. It was just great.
I first met Mr. Armstrong in 1947 at the Feast of Tabernacles at Belknap Springs. And there's quite a coincidence on this because I was only 11 years old at the time. Seemed like there was just a few of us boys, and we'd always want to go out on the swinging bridge that was behind the meeting hall. And we'd get that bridge a-bouncing and a-swinging. And when we did that, well, the girls would start hollering. And naturally, here come Mr. Armstrong, and he'd come down to the end of the bridge. And he'd say, "Okay, boys, come on." And we'd, one by one, come down to the end of the bridge. And as we come up to the end of the bridge, it was on the backside. Then on the 50th anniversary of the church, and in Eugene here, and Mr. Armstrong was here. And they said, "Okay, some of the old timers can come up and see Mr. Armstrong." We'd get in line to see him. Well, when I come up to him, I patted him on the shoulder and I said, "Mr. Armstrong, you don't even know who I am." And he says, "Yes, I do. You're one of them little brats."
As the work began to rapidly expand in the 1940s, Mr. Armstrong saw the need to move to Pasadena, California to be near the media facilities in Hollywood. The need to also train young men and women for service in the church led to the formation of Ambassador College in 1947.
I arrived in Pasadena, and we were in the library, the old library building that became classrooms and then later a radio studio and all that. Mr. Armstrong came in and started talking to us personally, and he said, "Young man, are you going to be there to register on Monday?" And I said, "No, sir, Mr. Armstrong." I said, I don't have any money. But I said, I hope to get at work and maybe I'll go later. And he said, I'll never forget. He looked at me and he said, "Young man," he said, "you be there on Monday to register and we'll worry about the finances later." And so that's how I got into Ambassador College.
As God was calling more and more people, the church quickly outgrew Belknap Springs. And in 1952, the church met at Sigler Springs for the Feast of Tabernacles. The attendance jumped from 150 the previous year in Belknap to 450 that year.
We have approximately 160, 170 people in this room today. Do you know how many years it took to have a Feast of Tabernacles with 150 people? 19 years. The first feast had 21 people in 1933. They only kept the holy days for the first few years. Then they started keeping the feast. And the statistic looks great. It grew by 14%. Well, that meant 3 people. Went from 21 to 24. But it took 19 years to have as many as 150 people at the feast. Can you imagine going to the feast the first year and having like the first 2 rows of people here? And that's all that was there.
1952, they went to Sigler Springs there in Northern California, which would give them more room. But lo and behold, God was granting so much growth now coming along, relatively speaking. They outgrew Sigler Springs. That was the only year they were there. The next year it came to Big Sandy and stayed thereafter as one church in that one area of Big Sandy until 1961.
In 1953, 300 more people came to the Feast of Tabernacles in Gladewater, Texas, later referred to as Big Sandy, bringing the total attendance to 750.
The first we came to Big Sandy in 52, and the Redwood building, they were just starting, digging foundation for it at that time.
It was a drum-like building made of cedar, and the 2 ends of this drum had not been enclosed yet, so every time we had a norther or a rainstorm, we had to make certain provisions for it. So we bundled up. We usually, a norther, as we called it in Texas, would blow in, and did during that feast. And so we just had to bundle up and endure it.